Tessa, 21 years old, stood behind the heavy stage curtain with her hands pressed against her dress, trying to steady her breathing. The banquet hall was filled with more than 200 guests, all gathered to honor her father Alex, for what he called a lifetime of integrity and leadership. The applause outside was loud, confident, and undeserved. As Tessa listened, she felt the old wound inside her stir again. She whispered to herself, "Tonight, it ends." She carried a small envelope inside her bag, one she had kept hidden for years. Inside were the documents that proved everything: what happened to her at 16, why she disappeared, and who made it happen. She was not here for revenge. She was here for truth. The lights dimmed, the announcer called Alex to the stage, and Tessa stepped forward from the shadows. 5 years earlier, at only 16, Tessa had stood at the same doorway of her parents' home, soaked from the rain, clutching a small backpack. She remembered Alex's face as clearly as if it were yesterday. He didn't look angry. He looked embarrassed. Her mother stood behind him, arms crossed tightly. "You will not ruin our reputation," Alex said quietly, like a judge announcing a sentence. "Leave this house and do not come back." Tessa begged him, her voice breaking. "Dad, please. I didn't do anything wrong." But Alex wouldn't listen. He pressed a sealed envelope against her chest. Inside was a document that stated she had chosen to leave. He needed that lie for people to believe. He shut the door on her, and the sound of the lock turning still lived inside her mind. At 16, she learned what it meant to be erased. After the door closed, Tessa walked for hours with nowhere to go. She stayed under a bus stop shed until the rain slowed, hugging her backpack to stay warm. She had only $30 in her pocket, money she earned cleaning shelves at a local store. When morning came, she whispered to herself, "You have to survive." She went to the community center and asked if she could clean floors in exchange for a meal. An older woman named Grace looked at her soaked clothes and trembling hands. "Honey, you don't have to explain," Grace said gently. "Sit down. Eat first." That kindness was the first light Tessa had seen in days. Over the next months, Grace let her sleep in the storage room during nights. Tessa worked small jobs, saved every dollar she could, and kept every record, because even then she knew the day would come when the truth would matter. As years passed, Tessa rebuilt her life one small step at a time. She worked at a diner, washed dishes, cleaned offices, and saved enough to enroll in a night school program. She often told herself, "If they took everything from you, build something they can never touch." One evening, Grace noticed her hunched over her textbooks. "You're smart, Tessa," she said. "And you're stronger than you think." Those words pushed Tessa forward. By 20, she secured a small internship at a local outreach organization. They were surprised when she showed them her record of work hours, saved letters, and school receipts. "You kept everything," her supervisor Mark said. She nodded. "One day I'll need proof of where I came from." Tessa didn't tell him the whole story, but the determination in her eyes told him enough. Quiet strength was becoming her greatest weapon. Meanwhile, Alex and his wife lived comfortably, pretending their daughter had chosen independence at a young age. They built the narrative carefully, repeating the same line to friends, coworkers, and church members. "Tessa wanted her own life," Alex would say with a proud smile. Their reputation grew stronger, not weaker. So when Alex was nominated for a prestigious community award, he accepted without blinking. But life has a way of circling back. The organizers invited Tessa after discovering her work at the outreach center. They didn't know she was his abandoned daughter. They only saw a young woman with a rising reputation. When the invitation arrived, Grace whispered, "Maybe this is your moment." Tessa didn't smile. She simply said, "It's time." She prepared carefully, gathering the documents Alex forced onto her at 16 and the proof of everything he denied. She was not a scared girl anymore. She was ready. The night of the ceremony arrived with sparkling lights, polished microphones, and proud speeches floating through the room. Tessa walked in quietly, choosing a seat near the back where no one recognized her yet. She watched Alex shake hands, smile confidently, and enjoy every compliment that came his way. He looked like a man fully convinced his past would never speak. When the host announced, "We will now invite a special guest to honor Alex's journey," Tessa felt her heart thump hard. She knew this moment wasn't random. Her growing work in the community had made her presence seem natural, not suspicious. Grace squeezed her hand before she stood up. "Remember why you're here," Grace said softly. Tessa nodded. She walked toward the front, not to ruin Alex but to reveal him. She kept her posture calm, her steps steady, and her envelope close against her side. But before stepping on stage, her mind drifted back again to that night at 16, her mother's cold stare still burning in her memory. "You brought shame on this family," her mother had whispered. Tessa remembered shaking her head and saying, "I didn't do anything." But lies are easier to maintain than truth when reputation is at stake. Alex had scanned her face once, then turned away. "Your presence will ruin opportunities," he said, as though she were a stain instead of a daughter. Standing backstage now, Tessa felt the weight of those words. She reminded herself, "You survived everything they thought would break you." She inhaled deeply, stepped forward and pushed aside the curtain. The room quieted as people turned toward her, expecting a speech praising Alex. They had no idea that the story was about to shift in a direction no one in that hall expected. Earlier that week, Alex had called the organizers and offered to approve the guest list. He requested that certain names be removed, mostly people he believed could misinterpret his past. His voice sounded calm and authoritative. "I want this event to reflect who I am now," he told them. The irony was crushing, because his biggest fear was already walking through the entrance. When Alex finally saw Tessa in the hall before the ceremony, he froze for half a second. He quickly disguised it with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're here," he said quietly, almost like a warning. Tessa held his gaze. "I was invited." His jaw tightened. "Do not try anything tonight," he whispered. But Tessa just walked past him. She didn't need to threaten him. Truth itself was a threat strong enough to shake any man who lived inside a castle of lies. Tessa now stood at the microphone. The room grew still, expecting a pleasant speech. She began softly, "My name is Tessa." Several guests smiled politely. She continued, "I am 21 years old and 5 years ago, I became invisible to the people who should have protected me." The smiles faded. She glanced at Alex, who shifted in his seat, his polite expression cracking. She opened the envelope slowly, pulling out the original document Alex forced on her at 16. "This," she said, holding it up, "is the paper that says I chose to leave home. But I didn't choose anything. I was locked out." A small gasp echoed through the hall. She kept her voice calm and steady. "I survived because strangers gave me kindness my own family denied me." "Alex," Tessa continued with measured strength, "for years I kept quiet because I wanted peace. But silence protects the wrong people." She unfolded a second sheet, records of the hours she worked, letters written by school staff, and notes from Grace confirming where she slept during those months. "I kept every detail because one day truth would matter more than fear." A woman in the audience whispered, "Oh my God." Alex's wife covered her mouth, shaking her head as though the facts were new to her. Alex finally said, "Tessa, that's enough." But she didn't even look at him. Instead she said to the audience, "I am not here to punish. I am here so no one believes a lie built on my suffering." Her calm tone held more power than shouting ever could. People looked at Alex differently now, like a man whose mask had begun to crack in daylight. The room no longer felt warm or celebratory. A quiet uneasiness settled over the guests as they listened to Tessa's steady voice. She placed the documents on the podium and said, "These are not stories. These are records. They show where I slept, how I worked, and who helped me when my own parents shut the door." Someone near the front asked softly, "Why would they do that?" Tessa met the woman's eyes. "Because they cared more about how they looked than how I lived." Alex leaned forward in his seat, whispering harshly, "Stop this now." Tessa lifted her chin. "If you wanted it stopped, you should have told the truth 5 years ago." The audience murmured, the atmosphere shifting from admiration to disbelief. The truth was no longer a secret whispered in darkness. It was standing openly under bright lights, impossible to ignore or rewrite. Her mind drifted briefly again to her early jobs, wiping counters at the diner long after midnight, folding towels at the gym before sunrise, counting every single dollar she saved. She remembered the nights she cried quietly in the storage room, not because of hunger or exhaustion, but because she once believed her parents would open the door again. "Maybe they'll call," she used to whisper to herself, checking her small phone for messages that never came. Grace once found her crying and placed a warm blanket around her shoulders. Child, their choices do not define your worth, Grace said gently. Standing at the podium now, Tessa felt those words anchor her. She continued, I built a life without the support I deserved, but I did not break. I did not disappear. And I did not forget the truth. Her voice wove through the hall like a steady, unstoppable current. Alex attempted to stand again, but the murmurs from the audience held him in place. His reputation, something he polished carefully for years, was now slipping through his fingers. Tessa scanned the room and added, My father has accepted this award for integrity. But integrity is not about speeches. It is about what you do when no one is watching. A man in the audience nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. She continued, At 16 I was told I would ruin his opportunities. But all I ever wanted was to be treated like a daughter, not a problem. Her calmness struck deeper than any accusation could. Alex muttered, You're twisting the story. Tessa turned to him and said, No, Dad. I am untwisting it. People whispered again. Nothing dramatic had happened physically, but socially, Alex was sinking fast, and everyone could see it happen in real time. Tessa then introduced the second emotional layer of the story, the person who helped her survive. This is Grace, she said, gesturing toward the older woman sitting proudly in the front row. Guests clapped gently, sensing her importance. She gave me shelter when I was alone. She gave me food, work, and hope. Grace wiped a tear from her cheek. Tessa continued, If not for her, I would have lost more than a home. I would have lost myself. Her voice softened. Family isn't only blood. Sometimes family is the person who hands you a blanket on the coldest night of your life. The entire hall fell silent, struck by the honesty of her words. She wasn't attacking her parents. She was revealing the gaps in their love and the strength she found elsewhere. Emotional truth held more power than anger ever could. Alex's face tightened as he sensed the audience shifting entirely toward Tessa. His wife whispered, Alex, what do we do? He didn't answer. The foundation he built, image, respect, admiration, was cracking. Tessa looked at the crowd again and said, I didn't come here to embarrass anyone. I came because lies survive when the truth stays quiet. And I refuse to stay quiet anymore. She pulled out the final sheet, a letter Alex wrote to the church committee years ago, claiming Tessa rejected the family's values and left voluntarily to pursue independence. Gasps filled the room. Alex closed his eyes. The letter betrayed him more than Tessa's words ever could. She placed it beside the other documents. This, she said, is the story they told. But tonight I am telling the real one. She stepped back from the microphone, letting the weight of every word settle into the room. The host of the event stood frozen beside the stage, unsure whether to intervene or let the truth continue unfolding. But the audience made the decision for him. A woman raised her hand and asked, Alex, is any of this true? Her voice trembled, not from disrespect but from disbelief. Alex swallowed hard, adjusting his tie as though it could steady the room. There are misunderstandings, he said, but his voice cracked on the last word. Tessa did not interrupt him. She simply stepped back, giving him the chance to speak if he dared. Another man said, If she was 16, why didn't you protect her? Alex opened his mouth, but no answer came out. Silence exposed him more sharply than Tessa's documents ever could. The crowd, once supportive and admiring, now studied him with cautious distance. Reputation is fragile when built on stories instead of truth. As Alex struggled to regain control, his wife stood and tried to speak on his behalf. We did what we thought was right, she said, her voice thin. But the audience was no longer accepting shallow explanations. A young woman near the back asked, Right for who? For her or for how people would see you? The question cut deeper than any accusation. Tessa looked toward Alex's wife, remembering the cold expression she held that rainy night. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. You watched him close the door, Tessa said quietly. You watched me walk away. Alex's wife sank into her seat. The truth was flooding the room, reaching every corner. This wasn't chaos, it was clarity. Tessa's calm presence made everything else feel unsteady. Grace watched proudly, knowing this was the moment Tessa had been preparing for through every year of rebuilding. The organizers huddled near the back of the hall, whispering nervously. They never imagined the award ceremony would turn into a reckoning. Meanwhile, Tessa continued, I worked every job I could find, but even then I never hated my parents. I hoped they would come for me." He paused, the memory still sharp. "But they never did." Her voice didn't waver. Instead, it softened in a way that made the entire hall lean closer. "I wanted answers. I wanted love. What I got was silence." A man near the front wiped his eyes. "No child deserves that," he whispered. Alex finally stood and said, "You don't understand the pressure we were under." Tessa faced him calmly. "Pressure doesn't excuse cruelty." The simplicity of her words struck the room like a bell. Alex sat back down slowly, realizing every defense he tried to raise would crumble under the truth. Tessa reached into the envelope one last time and pulled out a small photograph, one taken the day before she was forced out. She held it up for the room to see. "This was me at 16, she said. The girl in the photo looked hopeful, unaware of the storm coming. "I didn't know my life could change in one night," she continued. "And I didn't know the people I trusted most would choose their image over my future." Several guests covered their mouths, visibly shaken. Alex shifted in his seat, unable to look at the photograph. Tessa carefully placed the photo beside the documents. "But I made it. I survived. And I am no longer the invisible girl you tried to erase." Her voice held power, not loud, not angry, just deeply certain. The room recognized it as the voice of someone who had rebuilt herself from the ground up. Now the emotional weight of the moment extended beyond Tessa's story. Guests began whispering among themselves, not gossip but realization. "If this is true," one woman murmured, "he doesn't deserve the award." Another man nodded. "Integrity is lived, not claimed." The organizers exchanged fearful glances, sensing that the ceremony's tone had changed completely. They could not celebrate Alex without appearing blind. Grace reached for Tessa's hand and squeezed gently. "You've done what you came to do," she whispered. But Tessa wasn't finished yet. She turned back to the audience and said, "I'm sharing this not to destroy anyone but to free myself from a story that was never mine to carry." Her words wrapped around the room with steady strength. It was no longer a confrontation, it was a release. And in that release, the final unraveling of Alex's reputation began. The hall grew heavier with silence, the kind that exposes what words try to hide. Alex's posture slumped, not from age but from truth finally finding him. The award plaque sat on the table beside him, shining under the lights like a cruel reminder. Tessa looked at it briefly before saying, "Recognition means nothing if the foundation is false." Her tone wasn't bitter. It was steady, almost gentle. A man near the stage asked, "Alex, did you ever reach out to her?" Alex rubbed his forehead, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "We thought she would come back when she was ready," he muttered. Tessa lifted her head. "I was a child," she said softly. "Children don't leave because they want freedom. They leave because they are pushed." The room reacted with a soft wave of murmurs. For the first time all evening, Alex looked small. The organizers finally approached the podium, their faces tight with uncertainty. One of them whispered to Tessa, "Do you wish to say anything else?" She nodded gently. "Just one thing." She turned back to the crowd and said, "Pain has a way of growing quiet inside you, but truth waits. It waits for the right moment, and when it speaks, it doesn't shout, it stands." Her words settled over the audience like a soft echo. She continued, "I am not the girl who left crying in the rain. I am a woman who learned to stand on her own feet. And tonight I stand here not to shame anyone, but to reclaim what was taken from me, my voice." People nodded slowly, understanding the difference. This wasn't revenge. This was restoration. This was Tessa finally naming herself in a story she had been erased from for years. Alex tried once more to salvage the moment. He stood and faced the crowd, his voice strained. "We were afraid," he said. "We thought protecting our image was protecting our family." But the audience was no longer on his side. A middle-aged man said loudly, "A family doesn't abandon their child. That's not fear, that's failure." The words struck harder than applause ever could. Alex's shoulders dropped, his defenses collapsing. Tessa simply watched him, not with anger but with a quiet sadness. "If you had apologized," she said softly, "I would have forgiven you years ago." That single sentence broke whatever remained of Alex's composure. He looked down, defeated. The award he once wanted so desperately now felt heavy with shame. And everyone watching understood that the truth had done what shouting never could. It shifted the room's heart away from him and toward Tessa. A woman from the community board stepped forward and said, "In light of what we've heard tonight, we cannot present this award." Gasps rippled across the hall. Alex closed his eyes, knowing this was the consequence he feared most. The woman continued, "Integrity must be lived even when no one is watching." She then turned to Tessa and said, "Thank you for your courage." The room applauded, not loudly but respectfully with sincerity. Alex sank into his chair, his world shrinking. Tessa walked down from the stage, her envelope empty, her burden lighter. She didn't look at Alex with triumph. She looked at him the way someone looks at a closed door they once waited for. No anger, just acceptance. Grace met her at the bottom of the steps, her eyes full of pride. "You did it," Grace whispered. Tessa nodded softly. It needed to be said. As Tessa and Grace walked toward the exit, the audience parted for them like a quiet procession. Some people reached out, offering gentle touches on her arm and soft words of support. "You're brave. You deserved better. Thank you for speaking." Each voice felt like another weight lifting from her shoulders. Alex's wife called out faintly, "Tessa." But Tessa didn't turn back. She had given them her truth. She didn't owe them her attention. Outside, the cool night air met her face like a blessing. She exhaled deeply, realizing she had carried 5 years of silence inside her, and finally released it. Grace placed a hand on her back. "Where to now?" she asked. Tessa looked up at the sky. "Forward," she said. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was simple, honest, and full of a future she had built with her own hands. As Tessa and Grace reached the parking lot, the doors of the hall opened behind them. A few guests stepped outside, still shaken by everything they had witnessed. One woman approached hesitantly. "I didn't know," she said softly. "None of yous did." Tessa nodded gently. "You weren't supposed to," she replied. "That was the point." The woman lowered her gaze in shame, realizing how easily people accept the surface without questioning the truth beneath it. Another man stepped forward and added, "Thank you for showing us what courage looks like." Tessa smiled faintly. She wasn't used to praise. She had spent too many years learning to survive quietly. But tonight the world had shifted. Her story was no longer a secret buried in the shadows. It had become something brighter, something that belonged to her alone. And she felt the weight inside her begin to dissolve. Inside the hall, Alex remained seated long after the applause faded. His wife tried to speak, but he lifted a hand weakly, signaling he needed silence. The plaque on the table no longer symbolized honor. It symbolized the truth he had run from for years. Someone approached him and said, "You should apologize." Alex closed his eyes, hearing the words Tessa spoke replay in his mind. "If you had apologized, I would have forgiven you years ago." That sentence pierced deeper than any public humiliation. It revealed the opportunity he wasted, the daughter he abandoned, and the life he pretended never happened. He whispered to himself, "What have I done?" But the room gave him no comfort. Reputation had been his armor, and now it lay shattered at his feet. For the first time, Alex understood that the world didn't owe him sympathy. It owed Tessa the truth. Meanwhile, Tessa and Grace sat in the car, letting the quiet settle between them. Grace finally spoke. "You carried that pain for so long, child." Tessa nodded. "I had to. I didn't know how to release it until today." Grace reached over and squeezed her hand. "You didn't just speak for yourself. You spoke for every child who has ever been pushed aside." Tessa looked out the window at the glowing streetlights. "I just wanted them to see me," she whispered. "Not the version they created." Grace smiled kindly. "They saw you tonight. Everyone did." Tessa felt her chest loosen. Something inside her, something heavy and old, finally let go. She wasn't defined by that door closing at 16 anymore. She was defined by every step she had taken afterward, every job, every night of studying, every moment she refused to give up. That was her true story. As they drove away, Tessa watched the building shrink behind her, its bright lights fading into distance. "Do you think they'll ever change?" she asked quietly. Grace shrugged gently. "Maybe. Maybe not. But their change is not your responsibility." Tessa breathed in slowly, absorbing those words. She realized she didn't need an apology to move forward. She didn't need acceptance from people who once rejected her. What she needed, what she had given herself tonight, was closure. She reached into her bag, touching the now empty envelope. "I thought revealing the truth would be the hardest part," she said. "But leaving it behind feels easier than I expected." Grace nodded. "That's what healing feels like." The city lights reflected softly against the car windows as they drove further, each mile pulling Tessa closer to the life she had built. One grounded in strength, honesty, and the family she chose. Later that night, Tessa stood outside her small apartment, looking at the home she created with her own hands. It wasn't large and it wasn't fancy, but it was hers. A place built from perseverance, not pretense. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and exhaled deeply. For the first time in 5 years, her heart felt steady. She whispered, "You made it, Tessa." Her voice carried warmth, not pain. She placed the empty envelope in a drawer, closing it gently, not as a hiding place, but as a symbol that the story had finally ended. Grace sat on the couch, smiling at her with quiet pride. Tessa joined her, resting her head on Grace's shoulder. "What now?" she asked softly. Grace replied, "How you live." And Tessa did. No more silence. No more shadows. Just a young woman stepping into her future with dignity, truth, and a heart finally free.